Welcome back to a very special Kings of the North. Lots of smiles, lots of tears. Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis, and the most special of special guests. It's Ari, man. It's Ari Wasserman from The Athletic, but really more, Bill, sprung straight from our hearts and our loins, right? I
don't know about the second part.
we all made each other who we are. And now look at us. Ari, man, it's great to have you here, brother.
Really, really happy to be here. And you guys are my favorite. And anytime I'm ever talking about things that I've learned or discussing things from the past, I always make point of never forgetting who I'm attached at the loins with. And it feels good to be back. And you got me in trouble a little bit with my Heisman vote this year, Doug, with your philosophy. So we can get into that later. But sometimes I try to explain the way I do things, and what I just find out is I'm regurgitating what you do, and I don't think anybody can quite explain it the way that you can. So here we go.
There you go. Yeah, that's great.
He's back.
Flat brim.
Is that the white man can't jump hat?
You go hustle some people on the basketball court or what?
I can't, but I don't have. I'm never flat enough. I can't be flat enough to be part of the youth.
You get a slight bend.
But I can't. I was trying to find the flattest hat I had, and I don't have any flat hats because that's not how I roll. Well, we're so excited to be here, and I've done a lot of research because basically how this started is how most of our things start, which is like I think something very strongly, and then Ari thinks something very strongly, and they're opposites, and like, well, we guess we have to fight about this. But Bill, as we get ready to fight about recruiting and whether our views on recruiting and how much it matters to winning at the highest level has changed, I will say, perhaps disappointingly, I actually think we're not as far apart as once I started researching it. I think it's a little more semantics than it is opinions. Mm-hmm. So, Bill, how much do you think we will all wind up fighting today? Maybe mostly me and Ari.
I think you guys will figure it out. I think you'll find a way to fight at a pretty good clip here. No, I actually do think, knowing like kind of both of your opinions on the matter, that you'll find more common ground than not. But I'm excited to watch it play out.
Can I make an admission before we start?
Yes.
I don't even recall what we disagreed about. So I hope that
the list is long. How much time do you have?
I think what I have been saying is that I think people underestimate Michigan's talent and Michigan's level of recruiting and how much Michigan's talent played into its success this year. And I feel like perhaps people are attributing too much to Michigan's age and experience, when I actually still think Michigan's success is a talent conversation first. And I know you wrote for The Athletic a very intriguing piece that Michigan's victory changed your view on how you think about recruiting and how much recruiting at the highest level is a necessity for winning at the highest level. But why don't I let you, and this is also, I just Ari-splained. I Wassa-splained.
I listened to the show, Doug. I know how it goes.
So maybe I could just let Ari explain what Ari's actual opinion was based on both what you wrote, but just also what you think when you saw Michigan win a national title this year.
Yeah, I think that I learned a hard lesson, guys, and you guys know me very well, but I think one of the biggest downfalls for me, I guess, in this business, and dating back to the podcast, 7-8 years ago now, is that when I think something and I feel strongly about something, I speak about it in absolutes. And like, I was this could never happen. Like this, it's impossible. It won't happen. It can't happen. And I think so the biggest lesson that I've learned through this whole thing is that don't ever say never. Things change, crazy things happen, unpredictable things happen. It's sports. And, I do think that as we move forward into the 12-team playoff era, I can't just sit here and say you have to be in a certain point in the 247 sport composite team talent rankings in order to win a national championship, because Michigan and Washington, no matter who would have won, proved that can be done. So I do not want to sit here and pretend like my thought process on recruiting and accumulating high school talent has changed. I think what has changed is the intensity in which I bang on the table about it, because there are new factors that go into this whole thing. Experience obviously is one of them, and we're going to get to that later, but also how you can accumulate talent and what goes into getting better players. It's just all different than it was, in 2019 and 2018. So Michigan, their run, I was at the game. I could not believe that it actually happened. I would have told you 2 years ago, or even before this year, that it was impossible. Bruce Feldman, who I work with, wrote a story about how many draft picks Michigan was going to have. And like, I was the lead to that story of this idiot doesn't think that this could ever happen. Like, I am very steadfast in my opinion. So I think that I've evolved as a person as a result of it, but I don't know if my thought process of how important having good players is, or it has changed at all. So, I mean, I think it's very complex. And the thing with recruiting is that the numbers and, the way that you couch things, it's all a very complex thing. It's not that a very straight line to this is what I think, this is how I feel, and whatever. There are nuance to this and context. And I think it's important to discuss those things. But I'm not going to say anything's impossible ever again.
So what we're going to do here, we're going to talk about how views of recruiting have or haven't changed. We're going to talk about whether there's been a flattening at the top of the sport and whether that opens some doors for more teams in the North, because this is a Northern show.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to talk about specifically whether the game plan that Michigan executed at the highest level in 2023, with the number of guys that Ohio State specifically has coming back in 2024, could Ohio State do what Michigan did in 2023? But I actually think, Ari, you are wrong to be thinking you're wrong as much as you think, because I don't think that I don't think it has changed quite to the degree that maybe you are saying. Can we lay out these parameters? Bill, I'll start with you. We could just all give like our baseline answer here. When you think about, I don't know if it's past or present or future, but when you think about recruiting at the highest level, Bill, how many teams are in your highest level? Like, do you think of it as it's a tiny top level and it's a small handful? Or do you think of it as like, this is the best teams, there's a minimum, but a lot of teams hit that minimum threshold?
It's a smaller group for me. Yeah, probably like the top, a handful. And depending on the cycle, less than a handful, really. I would say it fluctuates between like 4 to 9 teams.
Okay.
For me.
Would you have thought that Michigan was part of that group or no?
I would have had them just on the outside.
Okay. Ari, how do you think of it?
When you said it, my number was 3. 3 consistently. And that's the thing with recruiting. We've had teams pop in, but to do it year over year over year, there's been only 3. Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia. And if you would have asked me if Michigan was out of it, I would have said yes, definitively.
So then when you have thought of you have to recruit at the highest level to win, have you thought to yourself that the only teams that it makes sense to win a national title are Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State? And we had like the Clemson run, right? Where Clemson wasn't quite recruiting at that level. They started recruiting better sort of after the fact, but they won their couple of national titles, not recruiting quite at that level. When you said like, I've changed my mind, was where you were previously the only teams I think can win the national title are Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is crazy. And here's the thing. There were teams that could have broken into that. I mean, Texas A&M signed a class with 18 top 100 players in it, which speeds it up. If they would have done it 2 or 3 more years and had a competent coach, then that would have changed. The problem is that there was nobody doing it on a consistent manner. Teams pop into the top 5 all the time. And this is the stat coming into the year that I would have tattooed on my back. There have only been 3 teams in the history of the internet era of recruiting that have won a national championship without signing at least one top 5 class in the previous 4 cycles. And those 2 teams were Auburn in 2010 with Cam Newton, and the other 2 were Clemson with Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. So, there were teams that are like kind of like Group A, those top 3 teams, Group A light teams, which would be like Texas and, LSU and teams like that have broken through. And the teams that have broken through in the last 10 years during the playoff era are the teams that have Joe Burrow at quarterback and the Joe Burrow that we know of today. And, Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson. But the thing too, that's interesting is that what Clemson did in 2016 wouldn't necessarily happen again, because the way that the recruiting rankings have shifted in the last 5 years coming out of high school, you have 5 teams or 4 teams signing half or 60% of the top 100 players in the country. So even what Clemson did during its runs back then was going to be increasingly harder to do. So this all changed quite a bit and drastically. But if you would have told me that coming into the year or in the offseason we're on Ohio State show, but that Michigan would be playing Alabama in the Rose Bowl in a semifinal game, and that Michigan would not only be favored by 3, but beat the crap out of them physically, I would have bet my house that would not happen.
Okay.
I was sternly against the notion that could happen.
Okay. So I think 2 things have changed. So let's start with this, because this is a big, the South can cram it thing. Can we eliminate the fake recruiting teams? Because part of the thing, like you said, you would have been willing to include Texas A&M in a thing because they fake recruit. Can we get rid of, until they show us a pulse on the field, can we throw out Texas A&M and Miami and Tennessee and anybody else who is fake puffed up by high school recruiting stuff, but don't develop, and in the portal world don't retain? Because one of the things, the idea, there's one thing to have Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia at the top, and then there's another to think that Texas A&M and Miami are a cut above teams like Michigan just because their recruiting rankings are higher. When Landis, they don't do anything.
Yeah.
I think the portal NIL world, I obviously retention and development matters more. But one of the things is I don't want to hear from them. I need to see some production from the recruiting before I'm going to take anything in a recruiting ranking and believe that teams like that are going to be good. So that's one of my things that's changed. Do you agree with that, Bill?
I think I do agree with that, but I'm curious, so what does that mean then for your baseline? The answer to the question you asked us.
So I think my answer to the question is a larger top tier, acknowledging that they're not all on the same level, but a larger top tier, perhaps that the modern NIL portal world, guys staying in school an extra year because of NIL, has increased the size of that group.
Mm-hmm.
But I would not put Michigan on the outside of that group, which is my main thing here. Do I think Michigan recruits as well as Alabama? No. Do I think Michigan recruits is close enough to Alabama to compete with them in this definition? Yes. But first, let's get rid of Texas A&M. Landis, we're booting them. We don't care about them until they show us something on the field with the recruits. Yes?
Yeah, I think them.
Fake.
A Tennessee is a good one. I don't know, LSU sometimes feels that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fake.
Yeah,
fake,
there's a decent amount of that in the SEC.
Are we going to boot? Can you do it? Can you do it? Can you allow yourself to ignore the puffery in the recruiting ratings of schools that sign guys and do nothing with them?
Well, there were a few things that I took exception to during your little thing there. One, I don't think that anybody would have put Michigan behind Miami or A&M coming into the year.
But on straight recruiting ratings, Miami or Texas A&M would have been closer to, you have to recruit at a certain level, right? Or no?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And the second thing I take exception to is that if we were having this conversation 6 months ago, Texas would have probably been in there. And Texas was able to do what it did as a result of having really good players that they accumulated during the recruiting process. So it's I do think there are dysfunctional programs out there, Texas A&M leaning the banner for that. And I think retention is a very important word here. I think this happened at Maryland a little bit too, where Mike Loxley makes huge splashes in the recruiting world at the end of the year. And then a year later, those guys are in the portal and they never touch the program. So retention, I think, is a big deal. But yes, I'm willing to kick them out of the discussion of who is a national championship contender until we see a pulse on the field. But that doesn't mean that I'm ever going to not value what they're bringing in, and overcoaching changes and things like that. Texas A&M's roster with what we think is a new competent coach at A&M? Like, are we going to dismiss the fact that they're better built on paper than most teams in the country with a new coach? Like, I have a hard time dismissing, and like that's part of the new me. Like, I don't want to dismiss anybody anymore. I have dismissed everybody continually and made people angry my entire career. And this year, the team that I thought was way on the outside looking in beat the crap out of the most talented team in the history of paper. Like they beat the crap out of them. It wasn't just like, oh, they won a fluke. They literally were better than them in every way.
So here's the other thing. So I'm interested in booting out teams that are all on paper. And then the other thing is what actually has me the most riled about this discussion is I think people who are having a discussion about Michigan that early in the discussion relies on their experience and I don't want to say dismisses their talent, but acts like it's more like COVID guys and experience than anything else. That's the Washington conversation. I actually think like that conversation is correct about Washington, but I think to lump Michigan with Washington is actually factually wrong. And I have some numbers for that. So my primary point is don't act like Michigan is Washington when actually Michigan, I think, is significantly closer to Alabama than it is to Washington. I'm not saying they are Alabama, but when you talk about the talent, the recruiting talent gap between Michigan and Washington, and also the experience gap there, that Washington has all these old dudes, I think that is real. But don't pretend that Washington and Michigan are the same.
What you just said is a fact. It's not even an opinion. That's correct.
But do you think some people act that Michigan's more like Washington than they are like Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State?
I think some people, me included, a month ago, would say you're not in the top 12 of the 247 Sport composite rankings, so you're all the same.
Okay.
And I think that it's like either you are a have or you are a have not. And that is an oversimplification of recruiting. And I was guilty of that. And that is my biggest thing of like, you're like, I don't think you're as wrong as you are. I was very wrong in that thought process. I made it black and white. I made it open and shut. You either have it or you don't. And what Michigan has done is interesting in the sense that the recruiting rankings do not blow anybody away on paper, but they are going to have 15 players drafted this year. So is there a way that you can out-evaluate Ohio State, out-evaluate the other teams and win a national championship? Clearly they can. They did it. And also they've done a very good job in the portal. But yes, I think that Washington was more like TCU in the sense of the path and who they were than Michigan was like dissimilar to Alabama. I think Michigan's much closer to Alabama than Washington is.
Oh, we don't have to fight about that.
Nice.
Oh, I thought that's what we're going to fight about.
It's beautiful.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, Washington's like way out. They were like 24, I think. And they had a really solid offensive line that was put together by a previous coaching regime. And they had a quarterback that was a 3-star that didn't figure into the composite rankings and some of the best skill position players in the country. And they were able to sling it around well enough to win before ever having to play a team that was built like Georgia, Alabama, or Ohio State. And then they played Michigan in the national championship, and it turned out that Michigan was closer to those teams. I firmly believe that. Yeah.
Okay, so here's the numbers that back that up.
Sorry if I ruined the show, by the way. I can disagree if you want to fight.
What's with that hat? So the experience conversation. The number of 6th and 5th year players. And I'm going by top 35. This is the top. It's about 200 snaps in a season, and it's only after the fact. Now, if we want to start playing this game, it's much more difficult than just looking at your rosters and looking at recruiting classes, right? Because part of it is retention, who plays, who matters, who stayed, right? So everything that I'm doing here and everything I've been doing on this show is your top 35 players, which is about 200 snaps on PFF. That's where it hits for about most teams. Of those top 35, 5th and 6th year players, Washington had 21 5th and 6th year players. Michigan had 11. Ohio State this season had 7. and Georgia and Alabama each had 4. So part of my point here again is like, well, what's closer to what? So Bill, 21 of 35 is unbelievable. That is all old dudes. That is, why did you win experience first? Michigan's 11 is more than Ohio State, Georgia, and Bama, but it's half as much as Washington.
Yeah.
So it's almost like Michigan is almost like right in between Washington and Ohio State, Bama, Georgia, but I still lean them more Ohio State, Bama, Georgia than I do Washington, because 21 out of 35 is crazy to me.
Yeah, no, I think you're right to do that. I think so if you're more than 50%, then I think that's probably the obvious threshold to say that the reason for your success is more like experience and just being old. But if it's 11 for Michigan, then I think you're right to compare it more to the Ohio State's, Alabamas, and Georgias.
You know what blows my mind, guys? Remember when we were all working together and we were covering Ohio State? Like, we used to say that if you made it to your 5th year, something went wrong. This whole notion of experience to me is kind of a twofold conversation, because yes, obviously it plays a factor if you have a ton of snaps. My coworker Manny Navarro put together a total snap count of the 2 deep before the Rose Bowl, and Michigan had 3,000 more snaps of experience than Alabama did going into that game in the 2 deep, which I think is significant. But also I kind of rolled my eyes as that just means that they're not in the NFL because they're not good enough like that. So where does that happen? Experience is important, but where's the threshold between you're not great and you're just really experienced?
Yeah, no, I think so hold that thought, because I think that's it's a very important discussion. That is a very important part of the discussion. And Bill and I have touched on how that could matter. And we think there's a comparison with college basketball. Just let me do this very quickly. And by the way, this is the other thing that makes me mad, because I tweeted hey, I vehemently disagree with the idea that anyone who thinks Michigan wasn't talented. And then people start sending me, well, the COVID years, and people start sending me, well, it's about the 3rd year guys. And I'm like, I know more than you do, which has allowed me to have greater nuance in this discussion. So don't come at me, Twitterverse, with COVID guys. Oh, wow, the COVID guys, because you're wrong.
Who were the COVID guys? Who were the COVID guys on Michigan's team that actually made plays in the game?
Washington might be, but don't come at me with that. And don't come at me like you invented the idea that 3rd year guys are the key to your success. We've been talking about that since Ohio State did it in 2013 and 14 and 15. So don't I hate when my nuanced, deeply researched perspective is different than your off the cuff opinion. And then you feel like you have to share your off the cuff, obvious opinion with me. I know. I have gone past your thinking, Twitterverse. So thanks, but no thanks. We're good. 3rd year guys, which again typically have been the thing, right? Ari, you're talking about 3rd year guys. You go to the NFL, we know what that looks like. Bama has a bunch of them. Everybody on Bama's team declared for the draft already. 3rd year guys are the top 35 this year. Michigan had 7. Ohio State, Georgia, and Bama each had 12. 12 of their top 30 guys were 3rd year guys, right? Of course. But Michigan's 7, Washington's 2. So again, that's that gap. And then are you playing young guys at all? 1st and 2nd year guys in the top 35. Georgia 10, Bama 9, Ohio State and Michigan both 8, Washington 2. So again, that's where I'm just saying, listen, you know what? I know Michigan. Mason Graham's a 2nd year dude. He's a baller, right? And I know, yes, Michigan's experience. Will Johnson's a 5-star recruit. He's a baller. JJ McCarthy's a 5-star recruit. Donovan Edwards is a 5-star recruit. That's the thing. Not as many as Ohio State, Bama, Georgia, but a lot more than Washington. Top 200 players in the top 35. They were ranked in the top 200 as recruits coming in. Bama is 27 out of 35.
Yeah, I was going to say,
To your point.
This is where we disagree, Doug. I went back and read the initial tweet, so we're going to get to it.
We're not disagreeing on that. Ohio State 22 out of 35. Georgia 19. Michigan 13. Washington 4. Okay, top 200 guys. Top 50 guys. Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State all 9. Michigan 4. Washington 0. So I certainly cannot disagree that Michigan is as talented as Alabama or Georgia, and that's not my point. My point primarily, Ari, and then you can yell about me why I'm wrong.
I have anxiety right now. Yeah.
I want the discussion around 2023 Michigan to start with talent and then go to experience. And that's what I'm fighting against the most. If you think Michigan only got here because they were old, you're wrong. That's Washington's story. But I'm not trying to say they are as talented as Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, but they're closer than you think. And I want people to acknowledge the talent that existed out there. Now tell me.
That's good. No, buddy, you got research, man. I'm not going to yell at you over research. I think that's true. No, the thing that blows my mind is
facts are in dispute. Facts are in dispute. My facts might not be your facts.
I don't understand how how you account for Michigan's talent if not for on paper. Like, that's the thing that I have a really hard time with, because paper has told the story every year. And, the thing that I used to get into fights with Michigan fans about would just be, if Ohio State has 30 top 50 guys on their roster and they have 12, that means that even if Ohio State only has a 50% hit rate of their top 50 players, they still have 3 more than you would if you had a 100% hit rate. So like the wealth and the excess of talent on these rosters is usually so deep and so dynamic that even when people get injured or people leave or get in trouble or suspended or anything, there's so much more. It's a never-ending cave of first-round picks. And the thing that I think is most interesting, and the thing that I'm having a hard time with when it comes to Michigan, is, did Michigan reinvent the wheel and do something that they can duplicate and sustain, or other programs can duplicate and sustain in the North, which I think we're going to get to? But also, how did Alabama have the most talented roster on paper in the composite era in the last 20 years and have so many freaking holes on their team? Like, it's not just about talent and a star person or a 5-star prospect always hitting to play and have 5-star production. It's about having so many of them that even when you miss, it doesn't matter. And I just don't know how Alabama either missed all over the place, or if their coaching staff didn't do a good job of developing or whatever, but they didn't have an elite level running back. They didn't have an elite level receiver. Their quarterback was a very talented runner, but clearly was limited as a passer. How do you have major holes on? I mean, we're talking about a team that used to have like 5 first-round picks in the receiver room. Like who are the, Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle were on the same team. Like Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara were on the same team. Like, where are all those dudes and why were they gone? And like the thing with Michigan more than anything is that, like, is it because they were so dynamic and reinvented the wheel? Or did they exist in a year where Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia were all fractured versions of themselves, were really, really good at the right time, and never could have competed on the same field as a 2019 LSU team or the 2020 Alabama team that beat the crap out of Ohio State in the national championship? Okay, like, so I can't think.
We have to decide if. So I think you make a point there, but we have to decide if that's the new reality or if that's a fluke. And also, right. Bill, by the way, Ari's coming for Saban, so we probably should change the topic. Because like, what happened? What happened to the coaching at Bama? Maybe the old guy needs to retire. That was Ari that said that.
How is that possible, though? Like, honestly, when you know what you know, you guys know just as much about this stuff as I do. How does that happen?
They haven't developed receivers in the past 3 or 4 classes, which they had to go, which is why they're in the portal constantly for receiver. They hit a hole at quarterback that they did not fill in behind the guy who was the number 1 pick in the draft with the quarterback at the same level. Same as Ohio State. Ohio State didn't do it either. Right? So quarterback play brought it down. Guess what? Michigan had a better quarterback than Alabama or Ohio State this year. Now, if Georgia people want to fight about Carson Beck, that's not what we're here to do. But like at key spots, they had stuff. And also it's one of these things where, Bill, like a very specific instance, Ladarius Henderson, the left tackle for Michigan, what is he, a 5th-year guy, a 6th-year guy? But he's a transfer, right? He's a new transfer. Guy, yeah. He's nowhere near the recruit that Caden Proctor was at left tackle for Alabama, but he's a 5th-year guy. Caden Proctor's a true freshman. Why is Bama playing any true freshman?
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Tackle. Right.
And also, too, you're also talking about a quarterback position that had 4 players that were top 100 players in the room. It's like Ohio State had 2 options and one got injured. Like, it's like the depth of what they had on the team was still there. Like, it's on paper. They had 5 or 6 top 100 players at the receiver position, I believe. And they had, they just weren't developing and they didn't hit. And like to miss on that many players at that depth is almost like a math equation that I'm too stupid to figure out. Like, I don't even know how that's possible. Like, it's just, it blows my mind.
So let's move on to like what has changed in the world with the portal. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask you a question, Doug, before we move on quickly? Do you think you would feel as strongly about the Michigan talent conversation if you didn't have the context of Washington to compare it to? Like if it didn't play Washington in the title game, and then like Washington allows Michigan to compare more favorably to Alabama and Georgia and Ohio State, do you think you'd feel the same way you feel?
I mean, I still would tell the South to cram it, but probably not. The fact that Michigan is definitively not the lesser talented team in the national title game. Like whatever that, but also, I mean, the conversation would change for everybody, I think. So it bothers me, but like, why are people not comparing Washington to Alabama? Why does it feel like I see people out in the world having a conversation like, well, Michigan's not as talented as Alabama. Well, why didn't they have that conversation about Washington and Texas? I didn't feel like that was as loud of a conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when actually that's the more appropriate conversation.
I think I know why. I think one, Michigan played Alabama, but two, I do think that there was this notion that Texas is a choke artist still, and that people didn't really give the team the talent that the talent had, like the credit, because that they weren't supposed to be there. Nobody thought they could be there. No, I picked Texas to make the playoff this year based on that cute little sheet that we're dismissing now. And it made it, but I still think there was a large portion of people that were like, Texas is Texas and they can't do it. Now, the thing that I want to know, Doug, and then we'll let you move on, not to hijack your show, but you talk about talent in Michigan. Yep. You said, and if I remember the numbers there, that Michigan had half as many top 50 players on their team it was 9-4, I think. And then the top 200 players was at 27-13.
Correct.
Like, where did the talent come from? Was that evaluation? Was that development? Like how do you quantify that? And can you duplicate that? Like, or is it the most insane collection of high school evaluation to ever be assembled in college football that happened to, like, the thing that I thought was impossible just happened? Like, is it a combination of both things, or how do you quantify that? Where do the 15 draft picks come from? They're all 3 stars that were just great?
No, I actually think what happened is that Ohio State, as you pointed out, sort of was just recruits on a different level than anybody in the North. And I think over the course of Michigan's success, we wondered why Michigan was not recruiting at the same level as Ohio State. Mm-hmm. And they weren't. Not equal, certainly not equal. But the result was that we underestimated Michigan's talent generally. Like, who's like a huge recruit? Blake Corum. Blake Corum's a top 200 player. Blake Corum's a big freaking deal. Trente Jones, who was their backup right tackle, was a top 150 national player. Huge deal. Cornelius Johnson, huge recruit. Will Johnson, huge recruit. Junior Colson, huge recruit. Mason
and they're
Graham,
all
top 200 player. Everybody wanted him out of California. Michigan got him as a second-year guy. He was a monster. Like, they got real dudes. Like, Michigan, yes, they developed well. They also went out and won recruiting battles. Junior Colson's from the South. I think Michael Barrett, their other linebackers, from the South. They went out and won them. They pulled guys up from the South and started them. Junior Colson's going to be like a 2nd or 3rd round pick. Now, he's not Dallas Turner, but he was a huge recruit who was really important to Michigan's success. And that happened. Will Johnson, if he doesn't pick off the pass from Kyle McCord in the Ohio State-Michigan game, Michigan might not be in the national title game. Will Johnson's a 5-star, brother. Everybody wanted Will Johnson. Michigan got him and played him from the jump. So, like, it's that kind of thing. There's enough of those. And that's the thing that, Bama has more. Bama has 27 in the 35, but Michigan has 13, and, like, their 13 really are all in their top 22. So, like, when we're doing, like, that composite stuff and the blue chip ratio and everything, like, the guys that played for Michigan, like, they're 65% blue chip ratio. Their roster's like 50% blue chip ratio. But the guys who played, and I do think in the NIL portal world, you have to focus more on the guys who played, because I'm not as interested in your first year and second year depth that's going to transfer before they get on the field, which we see happening at Alabama and Georgia right now. So
The average player on Alabama's roster is a top 75 player nationally.
But I don't care about that anymore. Like average player on the roster, I don't want to have, because like the fact that you have super talented guys who are going to transfer. Congratulations.
But that's from 1 to 85. Like that is insane.
But I'm saying I think we've been too caught up in what the recruiting rating is on the 71st most important player on your roster. And I'm saying Michigan had 27 high school guys and 8 transfers. They were super strategic with the transfers. So who would you rather have? Your 71st roster guy who's a 5-star who's maybe never play at your school? Or would you rather have Drake Nugent because you stole him from Stanford after they did all the work at developing him and then you're playing him? Like I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying I don't think it tells you anything. I think 1 through 85 recruiting stuff that once was all the rage, blue chip ratio, top to bottom on your roster, I don't care about anymore.
I just am
top
of the school of thought that if your 71st most important player is a 5-star player who is eating bench, then that is a very good sign for who is playing. Like I think those all correlate.
But let's just talk about who's playing then. Like why do we have to talk about who the 71st guy is?
No, because I agree.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to the original point, which is how did Alabama find itself with so many holes?
But I think the point is Michigan is never going to compete with Alabama on who the recruiting rating of your 71st best player. Michigan's going to lose that conversation every single time. But I think in the modern age, Michigan has a chance, and sometimes a decent chance, for their 10th best player to be better than Alabama's 10th best player. And I think we get too caught up in roster depth in a world where the portal and NIL encourage depth to move on. Like, what do you think of that idea, Bill, when we're trying to talk about how we compare teams?
No, I think you're right. And I've kind of evolved on that too. It's similar for me to the conversation we have about Ohio State's recruiting classes sometimes. Like the average looks great because they have 4 5-star receivers that pump the average up. I don't know why we wouldn't apply the same logic to, evaluating team talent, meaningful team talent. Like I'm with you, Doug. Like I don't think that the fact that Michigan or Alabama's average player rating is 75 or whatever I already said it was matters to the conversation. Now, if their average player rating of the top 35 is 75, like that is applicable and that is important. And maybe it is. I haven't taken the time to look that up. But I think it's a more interesting conversation applied to teams like Michigan. And the difference that can make when like trying to truly suss out like what the talent level is on a team. Like if programs like Michigan take a lot of 3-star players because they kind of have to, and that brings down the total team average, but they're still getting enough dudes that the number of snaps or the number of players playing the meaningful snaps is not the same like as Alabama. Like I think like on average, if you want to take a sample size of 10 years, Alabama's is probably better like 8 out of 10 years, but I don't think that gap is insurmountable for a team like Michigan and a handful of teams in the North that I think can kind of try to copy that similar plan.
All right, let's talk about whether it's applicable, whether anybody, what can be learned from the Michigan model. But let's talk about, before you can learn that, I think the world has to create an opportunity for you. So when we think about NIL and the portal, has it flattened the top? Because Ari, one of the points you're making is, would this Michigan team have competed with 2019 LSU, with 2020 Alabama, with 2021 Georgia? We've sort of been in the era to some of the super team, right? We know what that looks like. And the whole conversation around this year in college football from the jump was Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia are breaking in new quarterbacks. Maybe they aren't super teams. And there's a lot of teams in tier 2 who do have experienced quarterbacks. J.J. McCarthy in Michigan, Michael Penix in Washington were right at the front of that conversation. And as a result, has tier 1 come down and tier 2 come up? And I'm talking about like not recruiting, but like program status. So then I think the answer this season was definitively yes, of course. That's how we got here. Tier 1 came down, tier 2 came up. Will that continue? Is this the new trend that we are not going to see the same level of super team because maybe in recruiting, Miami and Texas A&M and Tennessee and LSU and all the Oregon, maybe some of these schools are pulling away a couple of the players that used to go to Bama and Georgia. That evens it out a little bit. Their depth leaves a little bit. NIL helps some guys at tier 2 programs stay in school if they're not going to be first rounders. I don't want to say the super team is dead, but has the modern world opened doors for the Michigans?
I think that's true. I think that it's going to get more drastic as we go. The thing that I'm struggling with, or had struggled with, and have come to terms with, is that on paper, Alabama was a super team. So like that, to me, it's like, when are we going to see the average player ranking at Alabama dip from 75 to 159?
Tomorrow.
Like, I think
like Caleb
like that.
DeBoer tries to go to a high school in Georgia, and they're like, who are you?
But that's the death of the super team to me, Doug. The thing that you don't, and I think it was an apt point that you made about the top 35. And I'm looking at the two deep for Michigan as you're talking, and their recruiting rankings and the correlating. And a lot of their starters are 4-star players. So like, they're not like 3-star players all over the place. But are we ever going to get to a point where Georgia doesn't have a first-round draft pick sitting on the bench? Like, are we ever going to get to a point where?
Do you think yes or no?
I think yes.
I think
that.
Who was the guy who went to USC? The defensive tackle that went to USC, Bear Alexander.
Bear Alexander.
I think that's an example of things that are going to happen more.
And I think that temperament is a really interesting thing, because I was actually talking about this on the show that we had after the national championship game. And it's like the LeBron factor a little bit. And I don't know if you guys buy into this, but everybody was saying at the beginning portions of the 4-team field that the 4-team playoff killed college football because all the recruits wanted to go to the schools that played in the playoff every year. And my contention with that was that people who were growing up and seeing the way things were done were under the impression that it's cool to do what LeBron did and go play together and be together and wait together and excel together and wait your turn. And I think now the modern day temperament is the exact opposite of that, which is you're your own personal brand and you can go anywhere in the country and get picked. The path to the field is quicker here, so you get paid more in NIL dollars. Don't wait, go. Like, the don't wait, go temperament of the recruit, I think, is a lot more different in terms of how the game has evolved and the rules that have allowed it to evolve than it was in 2017. So like this, there used to be a stigma with transferring. Remember, like people used to be like, oh, he couldn't compete or he didn't want to do it because he's weak and whatever. And now it's, I'm going because I want to play faster and make money, or I'm going because, you know, there's a path to the field that didn't exist here. And to me, that is what's going to change it. And you have good players leaving. And that's like Florida State this year was the perfect example of that. If you go look at Florida State's team, like Jordan Travis and the Benson, the running back, Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, Jared Verse, all of those guys were 3-star prospects or below, and they were all had first-round production. And I think this kind of mirrors what you were saying, Doug. I think that rankings are going to start taking a backseat to production. Are you a 5-star prospect? That's great. Are you producing as a 5-star prospect? Jared Verse might be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft coming up. He was like a 2-star. But what was he producing as? And Florida State got him once he started producing that way, and it changes the scope of things.
You're killing your career right now. Production matters instead of recruiting ranking.
Well, I mean, the thing about it is that there used to be a direct correlation between those two things. But if you take the correlation out of it, then there isn't. Like, it never used to be every 5-star prospect is going to be a first-round draft pick. The argument always was if you have 20 of them, then 7 of them are going to be first-round draft picks, and you're going to have 7 first-round 5-star freaks on your team that the other team doesn't have. And that was always the discussion. But if you can't collect them the same way, then there's going to be, trial and error in evaluations and misevaluations that cause that to muddy the waters a little bit.
But there have always been players who exceed their recruiting ranking, right? The guy that leaps to mind is like Khalil Mack at Buffalo.
Sure.
We all saw firsthand in 2013 against Ohio State, and we were like, wow, this guy's unbelievable. Right back then, Khalil Mack, he's an underrated guy. He goes to Buffalo, and then he just stays at Buffalo, and he develops into a first-round pick. But now
he's at Florida State.
he'd be at Florida State or he'd be somewhere else.
Right.
He wouldn't stay. Right. Like JJ Watt, right, went to Central Michigan, then he did transfer because he switched from tight end to defensive, but went to Wisconsin. But like it was often that like whatever you were viewed as out of high school, then no matter how good you got, you kind of were stuck or didn't want to leave. And so now if you can be a team, you don't have to pull high school guys like Bama and Georgia does, but you've got to pull NIL guys. And that's the thing. The fake teams, fakety, fake. Texas A&M, that's not what they're doing. They're NILing high school guys who then either don't play and leave, get good and leave, but they all leave. They leave. Florida State is like, Keon Coleman's like, hey, I'm like the third best receiver in the Big Ten. Florida State's like, cool, here, come on down. And it works perfectly. So like that is it levels the playing field, Landis. And I think what it's going to do, it's going to create what I had called tier 2. It's just going to expand tier 1, which is again my whole point here. I just don't think it makes sense anymore to act like Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State are by themselves in the top tier. They're not going anywhere, but they have more company.
Do you know off the top of your head how many starters on Michigan's team this year were transfers? Because I haven't. Do you want to guess?
Don't come.
He's done the research.
This is Manny's research. I've got it up.
I don't need Manny's research. I have Doug's research. But like all I know is top 35, 27 high school, 8 transfer. So if we wanted to go by starters, Drake Nugent, Ladarius Henderson, AJ Barner, and 12 personnel is kind of a transfer. Ernest Hausman at linebacker is not a transfer, but he's a third linebacker. Josh Wallace at corner is a transfer from UMass. And then Hinton didn't start on the offensive line. So 2 on the offensive line, 1 at tight end, 1 at corner. And then anybody else for starters?
There was 4. That's what I had. So if you have 4, but the reason why I brought that up is because as great as it was for Florida State to do what they did this year, guys, I still don't think that is the pathway to being consistently elite. I still think it's always going to be the first part. And can you dip in? Like, I still think that, like, even if you look at what Mike Norvell is doing at Florida State right now, he's still trying to recruit in a way that Florida State hadn't been recruiting until before he got there. And that is always going to be the key part of it, I think. And if you can take those Texas A&M defections and, do something with it, that's great. But also, I'm never, ever, ever, this will never change, going to turn down my nose at any team that signs 12 top 100 players out of high school any way they do it. Like, that to me is still, I would take the ability to do that over everything.
Agreed, but you also shouldn't turn your nose down at the guy at the team that signs 4 of those guys and then develops them and then supplement. Ole Miss is going to be a great test case for this year because they're going crazy in the portal. We've seen teams go crazy in the portal, and maybe you can get a one-off. Maybe you can, but you're not going to sustain it. So the way to sustain it here is still high school recruiting and strategic supplementation where you fall short. And even Bama's been trying in the portal at receiver and like not succeeding,
failing.
Right? They didn't get Emeka Ibuka in the portal. They're taking, like, they got Jermaine Burton, or they got Georgia's been doing the same thing. So I think we are flattening the idea of the mostly Southern super team. I think it will be harder to do that, but more importantly, I think we're strengthening tier 2. So to me, in the end, Landis, what we're talking about is a larger group of teams with a real chance. And like, for instance, Michigan is 1,000% in that tier. I think consistently, I think even if Jim Harbaugh leaves, because I think they are the best illustration of that tier. But I do think this Michigan plan is something that other teams can try to do. Like, again, people said, well, the COVID, like Washington, you can't say, hey, let's try to get 31 of our top 35 guys to be 5th and 6th year players. That's never going to happen.
Which is still an insane stat. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't even know it was that dramatic.
10 6th year guys.
So here's one other thing I wanted to add to this.
This does feel the same because I keep trying to ask Landis a question.
I'm sorry. Okay. You can do it.
No, I don't mind. Go ahead.
I gotta be, Landis is the host for me. Like, I'm waiting for him to ask me a question back in the day. But the thing that I'm interested in, and Bud Elliott, the person who created
the godfather of the blue chip ratio.
Yeah, the blue chip ratio. he and I have disagreed on something, and I want to know what your guys' take is. But his whole thing is you have to be in the blue chip ratio to win a national championship. And Michigan was in the blue chip ratio this year. So for him,
Right.
This was not an exception to the rule. My thing was you have to not only be in the blue chip ratio, you have to be in a certain maybe top 5. And if you asked me before the year, how many teams do you think could reasonably win the national championship this year? I might have said 4. And I think moving forward now, and this might make your point here, Doug, the answer probably is more like 15.
Yeah, I think I would be closer to Bud on that there's still a cohort, and there's always exception to every rule, but there's a minimum threshold of talent that exists, but it is not required to be in the very, very, very top group. So I do think my view has changed, but I think Bill, this is really, it's an NIL and portal conversation, which again, I think is why a lot of people were in favor of those two things, because of the belief that it will spread things out.
Yeah, and I think it will too. And I know Ari talked about this stat on his podcast that I looked up. I don't know if we actually talked about it on ours, about the average player rating on 247 Sports. Like I just looked up the number of teams that had a 90 or better. And a 90 is like a higher end 4-star prospect, right? Or not a higher end 4-star prospect, but like a 4-star prospect. The number of teams that met that threshold in this most recent recruiting class was 19, which was, I think, like 7 more than the previous class. And
that's your stat.
Yeah, I know. I said you talked about it on your show. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I stole it. Yeah,
I told you about it. So that number like dramatically increased in this cycle, and I actually think a 4-star prospect is like an 89 or better. So if your average player that you're bringing in high school is that or better, and then you can close the gap on the teams that are recruiting like high-end 4-star average by supplementing with NIL and portal guys. And I don't know, that wasn't the reality of the sport like 4 years ago.
Right.
So like
right.
I'm with you, Art. Like if you would have asked me in 2017 about the blue chip ratio, I would have said, yeah, it's not merely being, what is it, 55% or greater of your roster. Like I would say you have to be upwards of like 70, 80%.
70, yeah.
For me to take you seriously. And now I don't think that's the case. I think it's closer to like 50 or 60, which is kind of where Michigan was, because now you have that ability to supplement with the NIL and portal guys.
I don't think we were all wrong. Like you guys used to make fun of me. It's like, how did this guy create a brand of just saying you need to breathe to live? Like talent is good. That was never wrong. It has become wrong because the sport has evolved.
And not even like it changed. Like they changed the rules. Like they changed.
Yeah, it's not changing back. Yeah.
They made 2 gigantic rule changes with NIL and the portal, and they also expanded the field of who gets a chance to try to win at the end of the year. So in a world before, again, it was whatever it was at the beginning of the playoff, like the first 7 years of the playoff, right? It was Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, and Oklahoma. It accounted for like 22 of the 28 spots in the playoff, right? It's like, what are we doing here? Like even like Georgia wasn't in there, right? So like that idea that you've created more opportunity and then you've enhanced the rules to help teams build their teams has changed things. So who can that affect, especially in the North? Because this is Kings of the North, and the South can cram it. We'll dive into that next. Doug, Bill, Ari on Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises back with Bill Landis and our very, very special guest, Ari Wasserman. If you guys don't, there's some people here who like migrated over because they love Ari wherever he goes. It's like, he's on this other show, we'll go do that. But like we did a podcast together in 2015 for how many years? 15, 16. When did you leave Cleveland? That was at Cleveland.com. Ari, you left in...
He left after the 17 season.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I left in the middle of the 18 season.
Okay. Thanks.
Because I couldn't stand a full season without you, and just me and you working together.
Yeah, listen, guys.
I drive people away. What can I say?
Hey, we're if you guys are expanding, you never know. Maybe I'll be back.
Landis is our chief content officer. Talk to him.
Yeah. Landis is here. You never know.
Athletic people. Ari's kidding. He loves working there. Stop.
It's funny.
I know.
But like I told Landis this when he was here for the Cotton Bowl, he came over. Like all of the pictures on the wall here are like road games that we took pictures of and like we were all together. Like I still think very fondly of our time and could not think higher of both of you guys. And honestly speaking, now that like my job has changed a little bit, I very much enjoy listening to your show. It's smart, it's real, and it's research based. And I've learned a lesson to never bring my own research onto the show. You know, I think it is one of the most entertaining listens out there, and I'm not just saying that. So I respect the hell out of both of you guys, and I miss you. So I'm happy to be here. And if we get an hour a year, I guess that'll be enough for my love tank. Yeah.
Well, we're excited to have you here. And again, if you guys are KOTN listeners and you lost track of Ari, he's at the Athletic. He has until Saturday, right? That's your show at the Athletic.
That is. Yep.
Yeah. How many days a week do you guys go? Like
we go 5 or 6 times a week in the season, and then I think we are now shifting to a 2 or 3 off-season crescendo. So I think that it's been fun and I enjoy it, but everybody always says that my job as the host of that show has been permanently poisoned by the Ohio State brain that I have. And I think that is probably true. You know, just like covering Ohio State, the expectations at Ohio State, being around you guys, the countless of hours of conversations that we've had without microphones on our face in cars has permanently warped my brain to view the sport a certain way. And I got to tell you, sometimes Kansas State fans don't really love it. So, you know, that's kind of the way it works. But I don't know where my career is headed or where I'm going, but I do know that it will be forever influenced by the time that we all spent together.
All right. So we poisoned Ari's career. Cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, bro.
I have Ohio State brain. Yeah. It's okay.
All right. Let's talk about who can follow this Michigan model, especially in the North. Bill, do you think it is replicable? When you look at this, there's a level of talent that's required. Maybe keep those guys around. Everybody knows that. Michigan made a big deal last year when they kept Blake Corum and Cornelius Johnson and Trevor Keegan and Zach Zinter, and that did matter, right? Some of these 4th and 5th year guys, 6th year guys aren't going to be the norm. But, you know, like this idea, well, the North, and we've hit this a lot, obviously. Northern titles in the last quarter century, Ohio State in 02, Ohio State in 14, Michigan this year. It has not been the norm. Can more Northern teams do this?
I think so. I think there's probably maybe 7 or 8 that I think could get there. It's important to point out like that the Washington model over this year, I don't think is replicable because of the washing out of COVID guys, and eventually we're not going to have players who have 7 years of eligibility or even 6 years of eligibility, because to get that normally it's because you were like injured, and there's not a whole lot of those guys. There are some, but not enough, I think, to build your roster out of them. 4th and 5th year guys certainly, and that, you know, that'll become the new norm, I guess, in terms of being the more experienced, older kind of team. But generally, yeah, I do. I think there are enough teams in the North, especially now with NIL, capable of a baseline high school recruiting level that they can then supplement with transfers to be what Michigan was. Not every year, but like, you know, in certain years. Yeah.
So we count 28 teams in the North. Let's play a little game. It's called, can this Northern school try to win with the Michigan model? So we'll count Michigan and Ohio State as 2 Northern teams that certainly have that ability.
Sure.
Ari, name another Northern team that can try to do this.
Oregon, is that one of the 28?
Oregon is one of the 28. We agree. That's a good one. Bill, name another one.
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. Do we agree? Ari, you think Notre Dame can do it this way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say Penn State.
Yep.
Do you guys think Penn State could try to do this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's 5. Ari, is there another one?
Well, I actually have it in my head. Like, what is because like those are the 5. Did we do 5 there? 4 or 5 that like were on top of my head, because I'm looking at composite talent rankings as we're doing this as a cheat sheet. Sorry, I'm not a stats guy. I'm a cheat guy. I cheat. What do you think? Can I just ask, not to interrupt this, but what is the baseline level of recruiting that you have to be to do that? Do you have to be 10 through 18, or is it subjective?
I think you have to average a 4-star recruit.
Okay.
Which is like 80 and 89 rating or better.
Then otherwise we're talking about the Washington model. And can you build up to a year and be super experienced and keep guys around and just hit it in a 1-year peak, which is not really what we're talking about here. Because I think if we have that conversation, who could follow the Washington model? I think you expand the field even more.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this might be it.
I was going to say, like, I'm done. I don't know.
All right,
what were
Bill, you're not done.
I would put Nebraska in there.
Oh yeah, right. I meant to say Nebraska too. I think Nebraska is right. Wisconsin with Luke Fickell.
Yep, I think so.
Okay.
Well, let me ask one that kind of is a curveball then, based on, when we were covering the team together, was Michigan State one of them?
With the right coach, I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they have the right coach with Jonathan Smith.
And they've been that in the past, right?
They were the epitome of this.
Yeah. Washington. Can Washington do this again?
I think so.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now we're at a third of the North. So the North can't be Georgia. The North can't be Bama. The only Northern team who can try to do that is Ohio State. Even Michigan, again, as much as I'm saying don't underestimate Michigan's talent, they didn't do it the Bama way. They did it with their own talent-driven way that, as 27 guys in the top 200 to 13, is different. Now,
I think Oregon can be with Uncle Phil's money. They're trying to be it.
So you think Oregon and Ohio State can do it the Bama Georgia way, and then these other 7 schools can do it the Michigan way?
That's if, and like going back to the previous segment, if the Alabama way even exists anymore. Like that's the interesting twist on this. And this is the other program that is kind of a weird one. And you can just tell me to hang up the podcast mic and catch me later. But Maryland with the right coach? Maybe?
I mean, the DMV probably has enough talent for you to do that. If
Virginia Tech with the right coach, maybe?
They aren't technically. We have to have a conversation about whether.
I don't actually know anything about geography, and if I were to take a high school geography test right now, I would fail. So is that like
they're in the border? They're in the border.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Maryland,
because I think Missouri is another interesting border one too.
Yeah.
I would say no on Maryland.
Okay.
I think like they are certainly located in a fertile recruiting ground, but it's hard for me to envision the scenario where they're winning all those battles to put them in this reality.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Let me throw in another Northern team, actually, that I think does hit it. Utah.
Oh. Yeah.
Utah.
I could get there.
How about Colorado? Can Dion
I don't think they recruit high school well enough.
They don't recruit high school at all.
Yeah.
Okay, so Utah gets us to 10. And then I think, like, honestly, there's like another batch, like the Washington model, like a 1-year peak. Because I think the Michigan thing is sustainable, right? So can you build up to it? You're not a flash in the pan, but there still probably is a peak there. Like, could Syracuse and the best vision of Fran Brown, year 4 of Fran Brown, it all comes together. Could they have a 1-year peak that gets them in the playoff that is more like the Michigan model, the Washington model, excuse me?
Only if you think that this can be done without having an average 4-star player on your roster.
Because Washington wasn't that, right? Again,
right.
Michigan conversation, that's what we're talking about. Washington, we're not. But I think by that, for a peak, I think now we're bringing in, like, could Syracuse do it? Could West Virginia do it? Should I say Iowa? We don't know who the offensive coordinator is going to be. I don't want to say it. Do I say Iowa? Do you want me to say Iowa?
I feel like
say it.
I mean, if we're going to, like, what's the fundamental difference between Wisconsin and Iowa? Like, when we're talking about, like, I don't.
Well, it used to be that one school employed the coach's son.
Yeah, right.
That's not the case anymore.
But in terms of like recruiting, high school football recruiting footprint, I think it's the same, right? And like Iowa, I actually think like has sneaky good NIL going on there to actually get some impact transfers if they wanted to.
Iowa kept everybody.
They have, yeah. And
Luke Lachey stayed, Jay Higgins stayed, like all these guys stayed.
Are you guys approaching this from program standpoint or program with coach standpoint or with current coach? Because Wisconsin and Iowa are very different with current coach.
Yeah,
right. Iowa and Wisconsin as a program are the same.
Right.
I'm approaching it from program because I think you're right. Like I can't see Kirk Ferentz getting there, but
yeah,
right.
But if Iowa moves on from him, Iowa with retires, yeah, right. I think they're the same.
So I think, but the important conversation here is, which is going back sort of, all right, to your original point. If there was a world where you had to recruit like a maniac to win a national title, that took out basically everybody in the North except Ohio State. Because even like Notre Dame, when Notre Dame got to the 14 playoff twice, what they proved is they got there and they couldn't compete. Not at that level. To make it, yes. To win it, no. But now, even though this still was the 14 playoff, I think Michigan has set out a path with the changes in the sport that more Northern teams have a chance because of the way things are now. So I do think Michigan is not a one-off, and I do think Michigan should give programs, and again, it doesn't only apply to the North. I mean, it should maybe give what's like a good Southern team that it should give hope to? Like, should Oklahoma State take what Michigan did and feel good about it? Should South Carolina? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know who else it might apply to.
South Carolina, North Carolina. I mean, they had a few years where they were recruiting really well in the state. And that's the thing,
like
too.
Arizona.
Arizona. Yep.
RIP. Yeah. It is a very interesting discussion because I used to think that this is how I used to say it. And I think I even said this to Landis, but back in the day when you were the Notre Dame team that made the playoff, eventually you were going to play the boogeyman, and the boogeyman was peak Alabama. And if peak Alabama is never going to be peak Alabama again as a result of this, then the Notre Dame teams that made the playoff with a few extra sprinkles of NIL most certainly could win that matchup the way that Michigan did. The craziest thing to me about this Michigan team is they had dynamic running backs and a great offensive line. I don't think their quarterback was like a Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence dynamic player, and their receivers were B players. Like, it's not like they got there because they had like Rome Odunze and a Heisman finalist quarterback who darted it all over the field. Like, I think Washington and Michigan did it differently, but Michigan was good enough as a team from top to bottom to topple the non-apex version of Bama. And if the apex version of Bama is only going to happen once every 5 years now, instead of every year, literally, then that opens the gate of like, the top is not the top anymore. So the middle just has to reach a little bit higher to beat the teams that they did this year. And it's like, could the Notre Dame team with one or two more pieces that got blown out by Alabama the last time they played in the playoff actually beaten this year's Alabama? I think it's a resounding yes.
And I do think people looked at the semifinals the last 2 years, because last year and this year, the semifinals were excellent. They were very competitive, exciting games. It's not a fluke. It's the flattening. We're no longer in a world where there's not even like the third best team stinks. It's like, oh my God, why do we even have a 4-team playoff? It's useless because Ohio State's getting blown out by Clemson and Washington's getting blown out. And it usually was the Northern team. Michigan State's getting blown out. Notre Dame's getting blown out. Why are we even doing this? It's not coincidental. It's the flattening of the sport. It's the top coming down and the second tier coming up. And the result is 4 awesome semifinals. And guess what it's going to be next year? Awesome first round games, awesome quarterfinals. Ari, it's the new world, baby.
It's crazy because even in the old 4-team playoff, when the super teams existed, super teams got blown out. Like, it's not like, Washington with Jake Browning or whatever year that was, or the Notre Dame teams or the Michigan State teams. Like Ohio State as a super team, though, as we know, we covered it, very flawed, were blown out. Like, the blowouts happen to even the teams that we would think are no-brainers in this conversation. The super of the super teams were so crazily good. I think it is a fair question to ask whether or not those teams will ever be constructed that way ever again.
No, I don't think they will be. I think those versions of Bama and Clemson and Georgia have come down and everybody else has come up. So we've been talking a lot about specifically Michigan. So let's ask this question. What Michigan did, can it specifically apply to Ohio State next year? And the reason we ask that question is, Bill, again, you and I touched on this. In a world where it's about your third-year guys because a bunch of them are going to leave for the NFL, are we entering a world, and we had made a college basketball comparison, where if NIL's never going to keep first-rounders out of the draft. But if your third-year guys aren't quite first-rounders, they're second, third, fourth, fifth rounders, and NIL can help them stay in school. And it becomes a bigger conversation around, or can you be led by fourth-year players, even at a place like Ohio State? Michigan did it last year, kept some guys there. Ohio State has done it this year. Is this a worthy comparison? That, again, we're no longer asking, can Ohio State be Bama? Because Bama didn't win it this year, but all their third-year guys just went to the NFL. Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold and Dallas Turner and all their guys are leaving. J.C. Latham, they're all gone. Can Ohio State do this because they kept a bunch of their third-year guys?
Yeah, but I like, it's like a combination of Bama and Michigan, isn't it? Like, we don't have a baseline for what Ohio State's doing, do we? Like, they're the same in the fact that like they kept a lot of guys, I guess, who could have gone, and now they're going to be an older team. But I don't know that we've seen a team, maybe 2020 Alabama, like kept a lot of 2017 recruits for a fourth year that helped fuel their national championship. But I don't even think it was still to this level. Like Ohio State isn't really keeping players. It's keeping guys who were 4 and 5 star recruits, guys who were top 100 players, guys like second, third round draft pick is not something to be dismissed. Second, third round draft pick is a really, really good football player. So like, yes, like to answer the question, Ohio State can certainly be Michigan, like find success like Michigan next year. But I don't know. I don't think it's an apples to apples comparison, like what they're doing roster wise. I think Ohio State is almost a different experiment entirely.
Because it's split, because it's half Bama, half Michigan. Because
it's a team that recruits high school talent like Alabama, then retaining and developing and investing in older players the way that Michigan does.
How excited are Ohio State fans listening to this right now? Hey, Ohio State fans, congratulations. Get excited for next year. It's half Michigan, half Bama. Woo! What do you think of this comparison, Ari?
I got to say, I was at the Cotton Bowl. I was pretty down on where the program was headed. And like, if you told me they won the national title next year, like I'm all on board with that. Like the amount of talent that is coming back, and not just talent that's trying to develop into a draft pick. We're talking about, like Bill said, second and third round guys who are coming back. Like there's like Denzel Burke is coming back. You know what I mean? Like guys like that are legitimately good. I don't know that I would frame it in the same way as them being Michigan, I think from an experience standpoint, but I would echo everything that Landis said in the sense of this is like a very unique opportunity and window into college football that like the only way you achieve it is if something bad happens almost. Because if they were pretty good or made the playoff this year or beat Michigan and someone else won the championship, they probably all would have left. Is that my understanding? It's like you almost had to go through the pain to get to the point where you might have something new, dynamic, and amazing.
It's
right?
fueled by disappointment. It's absolutely
right.
And unmet expectations.
That's a good hashtag. Instead of like developed here, hashtag fueled by disappointment.
Be good for KOT.
Brought to you by Gatorade. Yeah. Brought to you by Gatorade Zero, actually, because there's no sugar in it, and that's always what the disappointment is.
If Ohio State had beaten Michigan and won the national title, and all these guys were first-round picks, they wouldn't be back. They wouldn't be back.
But also, you'd probably take that deal too, because obviously national championships trump everything. But what if they would have beaten Michigan and then gotten their ass kicked in the first round? They would have all left.
We don't say swear words on this show.
Oh, sorry.
Great.
Sorry.
Now we have to start over.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll count it down. Welcome, Ari Wasserman.
I'd do it again.
I do agree, but I mean, they weren't the same coming in, right? The Ohio State guys were more highly rated coming in, but I do think keeping Blake Corum and Trevor Keegan and Zach Zinter is not that dissimilar from keeping Jack Sawyer, Denzel Burke, and Trevion Henderson.
Yeah,
right?
they developed into they maybe you didn't think of them as second, third, fourth rounders, but they developed into that. Yeah,
like Michigan kept excellent players. And their disappointment wasn't as deep as Ohio State's because they had beaten Ohio State in 2022, but they lost in a semifinal game that they threw away. And so they were fueled by disappointment. So this is the way it works. But again, it's interesting. Like all the Michigan guys now are leaving. All the fourth-year guys, nobody's back for year 5 because they won. There's nothing left. What would you stay
for?
Right.
Yeah.
So
and like JJ's leaving after 3 years. Yeah.
Right. And JJ's leaving after 3. So like it is a the worst case scenario is like not achieve your goals, be disappointed, and everybody leaves anyway, right? Which is certainly could have happened for Ohio State. So, but this is, you would win a national championship in year 3. Everybody's a first rounder. Thanks for your 3 years. See you later. But this is the next best thing because they're going to run it back. And again, we've had this conversation multiple times. I thought maybe 2023 Ohio State was going to be an all-time team, and they just kept everybody other than Marvin Harrison Jr., and now they're going to try to be an all-time team in 2024. But even that, Ari, I think would go back to where things were when I talked about, I think this Ohio State team has a chance to be one of the great teams in college football history. It was based on the third-year guys.
Right.
Because that's how you had to do it. And maybe that's changed a little bit.
Can I ask the question here? I don't know. This probably doesn't – you can't possibly say this about guys who would be taken in the second round. But – I know, and I don't follow Ohio State as closely as you guys do, obviously, anymore. But is there any concern from an Ohio State standpoint that there's too much coming back? I know that there's a point of contention with, great players on the bench don't play enough and blah, blah, blah. Like, am I just an outsider looking at Twitter people, or is there anything to that in your minds?
I think you could potentially be setting yourself up for a steeper fall off like in 2025 than you would have otherwise. Like, I think like they would have had to play a lot of young guys this year, obviously, and maybe that wouldn't have looked great. But now, presumably a lot of those young guys are going to have to wait like another year. And then it's like the double question of like, what do they look like 2 years from now if they don't play a lot this year, or are they even here in the first, like, are they even going to be here in the first place? So I think it could set up like a kind of a iffy 2025 season, but I still think if you're exchanging that for a national championship, then it's worth it.
Yeah. But nobody's coming back that you're like, okay, it's maybe time to go. Like, everybody who's coming back is very, very good.
There's nobody coming back who's
right,
like not starter caliber and like shouldn't be playing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So
you'd have to play out of loyalty when there's a better guy behind him. Yeah.
Exactly. Because that's been a thing like that. I don't know about specific examples that come into my head, but like that has been a main criticism, I think, from a lot of fans who get upset. Yeah. Like, why don't better or perceived better players that might be in the 56 to 70 range on the recruiting rankings play more, because we know how good they were in high school. And obviously it's more complex than that, but I really do like this. Like, the thing that when you sent the text on this topic, is, can Ohio State in 2024 be what Michigan was last year? I was like, Ohio State should never change what it was doing. And I know things have gone awry, and, losing 3 in a row to Michigan. I mean, the last Michigan game that I covered with you guys, I wrote the rivalry is dead, like, based on this entire conversation. You have Team X over here recruiting 100 legitimate fringe 5-star players, and Team Y who isn't doing it at all. And now here we are. I think Ohio State should still do everything that it used to do. It's just sometimes unfortunate years happen, or you miss on a quarterback, or guys get injured and stuff happens. But the fact that they're getting all these guys back based on that disappointment, on top of the continued rolling of the recruiting rankings that they just had in the last year's class, plus upgrading the quarterback, which I think is going to be an interesting thing for Ohio State moving forward in terms of whether or not that's the plan, or if that just has to happen sometimes. I mean, I very much like everything that has happened for Ohio State in this offseason, and I think it could amount to a national championship next year. Like, when you think about Quinshon Judkins and Will Howard and Trey Henderson, and even guys like Jeremiah Smith who are coming in.
You don't have to come on this show and name Ohio State players.
No,
we're good.
I know. But I'm just saying, like, there's a lot there is all I'm saying.
Let me tell you about Josh Fryer. Ari wants to take
I don't even know who that is. So you're going to have to tell me about that. I'm just saying, like,
I do think what we're zeroing on here, see if is this a final thing that we would agree on? Oh, that'd be lovely. You can win national titles with elite, excellent third-year players.
Mm-hmm.
But now you can win national titles with very good fourth-year players who weren't quite good enough to leave after 3 years, but are very good and came back for year 4. And maybe in the right circumstance, you can take your shot with solid, super old dudes, which is what Washington did this year. And like enough elite, like 4 elite guys sprinkled in the right spots. But I think the real battle now, and Bill, this is where we had a college basketball conversation, is very good fourth-year guys versus great third-year guys. And I think for the North, especially, they are more able to try to win with very good fourth-year guys than elite third-year guys, because no Northern team really is ever going to be like, hey, we got 5 first-rounders who are third-year guys right now. But Bama and Georgia can still do that. But there's a new path. I think it's a new pathway.
So yeah, is that so? The SAT question is like, one and done basketball teams are 3-year college football teams. Like,
yeah,
I think that's right. I would ask you, what's the last college basketball team built on one and dones to win a national title? Because it's been a while, right? If I'm not mistaken. So that sport, I think, has fundamentally changed. And like, I hesitate to like make a 1-to-1 comparison to college football, but I do, because there's more players, there's more. It's a different sport. But I do think that college football is heading more in that direction for sure.
Do you think that's an apt comparison at all, Ari?
I agree. Yeah. I mean, I have a hard time with basketball to football comparisons just in general, but the thought process, I think, is right. I do. And I think that if you have really talented players who stay in your program longer than I mean, like, what's the over under you set for any successful tenure? Like 2 years now? Like, it used to be like 3 and done. It's like now if you get a guy who produces for you for 2 years, you won. Like if that means coming in after starting somewhere else or leaving, that to me is a really good formula for sure. If you're fortunate enough to get to that point now.
All right. This was just all a prelude to what people really want to hear, which is us talking about food and movies. When we come back, a very special KOTN. If you've never experienced before, strap in. It's what you're watching, what you eat, and what you're thinking. Next on Kings of the North. This is a regular segment that we do on our Ohio State show, Kings of Columbus, where Bill and I, at the end of the show, we do what you're watching, what you eat, and what you're thinking. It's movies and TV, it's food, and then it's just life in general. But we wanted to bring it back here on Kings of the North. We might start doing this a little bit more on Kings of the North, but we had to do it because actually, when the three of us get together, they mostly want food talk. So we're going to skip Whatcha watching. We'll get to watching, but we have to start with eating. Ari, what you eating?
Oh, God, that feels good. Can I tell you guys something? I think I've texted Bill this in the past. Okay, so this is the year of the successful diet. I've had very many failed diets. I'm on like day 5 of a really good diet right now. I'm feeling good. And it's food this time. Let me tell you, the pizza formaggio, those little Trader Joe's frozen pizzas that you put in the oven that are like little personal circular pizzas.
The little guys, yeah.
Red Baron better watch out, man. Those are really, really, really good. Yeah. And it's like a 10-minute thing. And it doesn't create a huge mess like a full pizza does. And yes, it's delicious. And if you're into the frozen pie, and I think we all are, we're Domino's guys, but frozen pie will do. It is the elite of frozen pizza.
What's it called again?
Pizza formaggio. You get
Bambinos,
4 of them.
Little ones.
Bambinos. Yeah. Bambino, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah,
Rudy. It's like a silver. It's like a $silver pizza. You know, Rudy.
Yeah. You should check it out. They are, they are very, very good for what you. I mean, I wish I had I went to Mastro Steakhouse this week, but like that was like one of the last meals before I started trying to lose weight for the 90th time, and it really, really hit good.
What have you had? Do you have to have vegetables with it? Do you have a salad on the side? What do you do?
No, I just had 3 of them. Yeah, I had a side of more pizza. Have you ever seen me? Yeah. Come on.
Pizza with a side of pizza. We've talked about this on when we've done previous What You Watching. Have you had the Motor City pizza, the Detroit style frozen pizza?
I have not. No.
It's good. I think it's the best. I think it's the best frozen pizza out there.
Yeah, there's a really good Detroit place in Dallas. I actually thought that Detroit was like either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. Like, are you going to be a deep dish or are you going to be a thin? Like, I always felt like it was like kind of had an identity crisis thing to it a little bit. But if you hit, and there's a lot of bad Detroit out there. That's the thing. Like, if you get good Detroit, it really hits. But there's a lot of posers out there. You got to wade the waters when you get the Detroit pizza. You certainly should not buy it from any of the chain pizza restaurants.
Well, it's good that the thing, Landis, is it comes with a pan, so it cooks in a pan. So it's not
okay.
So then it gets the crust crispy and it gets it like kind of greasy because it's not. You don't usually get a pan when you get a frozen pizza, Landis.
It helps get the cheese on the edges the right way with like the crispy cheese. Yeah,
that's a really good thing that you said that, because I think the entire Detroit style pizza thing is a marketing scam a lot of the times, where you get some flimsy, crappy like Sicilian crust pizza that isn't very good, doesn't have the cheese on the crust, and it's not deep dish, it's not thin, it's just like a watery, crappy, thicker cut. And it's like when Detroit hits, it hits, but you got to be careful. There's sharks out there.
I like the Detroit style pizza, but also the New York style pizza, like among the best I've had, is from a place in Detroit.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's called Supino's. It's really
We'll
good.
do a live show. Ask them if they want us to do a KOTN live show. Landis, what are you eating?
Still not. I had COVID, man. I'm not eating anything. I haven't had.
Come on, this is what you're gonna give me?
I haven't had an appetite for like 2 weeks. No.
Do you remember something you ate?
Do you remember that you ate? Yeah, like come on, we got together for the first time in years, and you got nothing
that I haven't talked about already. No, I don't know.
Oh, get out of here!
I made some. What do you call it? It's not. What's the place that sends steaks to your house? Omaha steaks.
Omaha steaks, yeah.
Yeah, I made some of those for dinner not that long ago.
Did you send them to yourself or did someone send them to you?
No, two different people actually sent them to us. My grandmother sent them, and I think my mother-in-law sent us some.
Were they
But you know
good?
what's they're not bad. Like they were fillets, which I like fillets are hard, I think, like to make really taste all that good because there's just no fat on them. But what's really good when you get those are two things. There's like an apple turnover, like a baked apple turnover thing that you get with them. That's like an excellent dessert. And then the other thing is, I think it's called like a twice baked potato. So it's like,
yeah,
it's like a whipped potato, like inside a potato skin.
Oh yeah.
That's very good. It's the best part of the meal, in my opinion. The steaks or whatever. Like if I got like a T-bone or not a T-bone, a T-bone, or any steak really that's not a fillet. I think I would have been more pleased with that part of the meal, but the sides are excellent.
I'm just envisioning you now getting steak, throwing the steak away, and eating a potato and an apple turnover, and being like, "I love it."
I would eat. Yeah, I would have 3 potatoes and like 3 turnovers and call that dinner. Yeah.
So mine is pizza related too, because I was in Chicago this weekend visiting our daughter at college. And it's just a reminder that once upon a time when you went to Chicago and you got Chicago style pizza, it was like special or whatever. And now I have a Chicago style pizza place 2 miles from my house.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I kind of long for the days when Chicago style pizza was a little more special. And it felt like I'm in Chicago. I'm going to eat this. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to pig out. I'm going to go crazy. And it's so available now, kind of ruined it.
Do you find your family going to Giordano's a lot still? Do you guys still go there all the time?
Not all the time. I went there for lunch the other day, but it had been a while. And it just like, I don't, as much as I love Chicago style pizza, I don't want it once a week. I want it, and not that I'm sure I want it once a month. I want it like twice or 3 times a year, I think, ideally. So I don't know. Like, do you guys have foods like that? Can you love a thing, but you don't? It's like, I want to have an affair with Chicago style pizza. I don't want to marry.
Right. I think that's right.
I kind of feel that way with cheesesteaks though. Because
you were married to cheesesteaks forever.
I know. Yeah. And now that I guess it's just that they're not as readily available. Like it's a nice treat. And
yeah,
I like that I have a cheesesteak like 5 times a year as opposed to like once a week.
Didn't you have, I mean, growing up in the Philadelphia public schools, was that not what you had for lunch every day?
Philadelphia Catholic schools. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
I'm a proud son of the Catholic League. But yes, to answer your question, we had cheesesteaks at lunch quite often.
It's funny that you have them, Bill, because the best cheesesteak that I've ever had in my entire life was in Columbus. So
well, that's where we get. I actually did have. I had Wario's the other day. Actually, now that I'm remembering,
because like that's like I'm just happy that my favorite pizza place only exists in Phoenix, and I can only get it when I'm in Phoenix visiting my family. And if it was right down the street, that would be a bummer. Like it would be great for the first year, but I understand exactly what you're saying. But there are like new variations, or the place that you and I went to, Bill, Pequod's. I don't know if you've ever been there. Maybe you've been there a million times. You went to Northwestern, but like that's not necessarily in the same ilk as Giordano's, but I still view it as Chicago pizza, and it was absolutely delicious. So maybe Chicago places that aren't quite as big as Giordano's that can scratch that itch for you next time you go.
Yeah, unless ubiquitous. Chicago.
Less ubiquitous. I could not spell that word.
We should make a list of that. Affair foods, not food, and then foods you marry. Just like we play that game, like marry, have an affair with, or kill. Food.
I'm gonna kill the salad, and then
Doug's like, hey, what did you side of green beans with that? Yeah, Doug, that's what I ate.
Bambino pizzas. But it's a diet. You said it was a diet. So
no, it was before the diet started because I didn't want to come onto the show and be like, I don't have anything. I had COVID, like this guy over here.
It's true, but then
I thought you were on a baby pizza diet.
No. I had 3 of them like a few days before I started it. Yeah,
I'm on a diet. I'm still eating pizza. They're just smaller pizzas.
Yeah.
All right. What are you watching?
Yeah. Oh, real quick. It reminds me of my friend who goes on a diet and buys Weight Watcher ice creams and then eats the whole bag. It's like that defeats the whole point. Yeah. What am I watching? So is this a movie thing or a show thing or either?
Anything using your eyeballs.
I have 2. One, I think you might go to, but the series finale the season finale of Fargo is tonight as we're recording this. And the reason why I started watching Fargo to begin with, Doug, if you remember, is because of you. You told me season 1 of Fargo was incredible. I was like 2 or 3 years late to the party, and I think that is probably a top 5 single season of television ever. And I don't know if you've kept watching it, but this season is really, really good. Season 10 is on January 16th. I can't wait for the child to go down. I'm going to eat my tasteless carbless dinner, and I'm going to light a candle. I'm going to watch the finale tonight, and I can't wait.
Awesome. I am behind. I have not. I didn't watch season 4 of Fargo, and I have not watched this one at all. So I know
season 4
related.
You don't have to watch. That was terrible. It was awful.
Oh, for real.
But season 5, terrible season of television.
But this one's good.
This season's great.
Who's the star?
Juno Temple is her name.
Oh,
she's the star.
Yeah.
And then the dude from Mad Men. I'm really bad at celebrity names.
Yes.
Right.
John
but
Hamm.
not
John Hamm. Yeah, John Hamm's in it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
My wife loves Juno Temple. She's from Ted Lasso.
Yeah, and she's the star and does the Minnesota accent perfectly. It's incredible. You need to go check that out. And I watched Saltburn too, that movie on Amazon.
How'd you like that? Did you know what you were getting into?
I didn't.
We can't talk about. No, we can't talk about the
I'm not. I can't say
scenes.
swear. No, I'm saying
Yeah.
I thought it was a very entertaining movie, and I thought the troubling scenes in that movie were completely and utterly pointless. And this movie would have been just as good without them. And I hate that.
Oh.
You don't have to put disturbing things into shows and movies if the only thing that it brings to the table is to be disturbing.
Yeah,
I think that's right. I agree.
All right, Bill, what are you watching?
I watched the Barbie movie the other day. Finally,
Late.
Interesting.
It's very
didn't love
popular.
it. Didn't love it.
Really?
Yeah, it was fine. It had funny moments.
Man,
just wasn't.
You got a problem with women there, do you? Huh? Interesting.
No. I figured. That's no, I just didn't. It felt like I don't know. Maybe it felt like it was like too long. Like it's just like a lot of the jokes are repetitive. Like some of it was funny, but I just felt like it was the same joke over and over again, like kind of packaged differently. Like we get it. Ken discovered patriarchy, but
yeah,
that was funny like the first 3 times, and then not as funny like the next 7 times.
I do think it's difficult when things are such like a cultural wave. Part of the enjoyment is like being caught up in the wave. And so you're like jumping back in the ocean like 5 months later, and it's like it's not surf season, and you're kind of floating along. It's like, well, I like it, but like you miss the waves. And I think it probably affects your view of it a little bit.
Probably. But I wasn't, even when it came out, I was like much more interested in seeing Oppenheimer than I was Barbie.
Yes, because you're a man.
Yeah. But it's not like, I don't think it's not a movie purely for women. I don't think. I also was surprised too, because it didn't.
They're gonna clip that out and put it on the ad for people.
I mean, a lot of men got into the Barbie thing during the
women. I think.
I thought it was going to be more like a movie for children that had like enough for adults in there to keep it funny and interesting. But it was like much more of a movie for adults. Like it was not a movie for kids.
Yeah. Who did you see it with?
I watched it by myself when I was. I watched it as the lead into the playoff games on Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, squeezed in a Barbie between football. Didn't like it too much.
Basically.
I did think, as a man, I got extra enjoyment out of it by watching it with my wife and my daughters. So that it's like they enjoyed it in a different way, and so I enjoyed their enjoyment of it as well as my own enjoyment. Yeah. So I am watching this show. It's old, but I think it just came on Netflix. It's called Louder Milk.
Mm-hmm.
Ron Livingston, and I'll work this into my what I'm thinking too, because he's an a-hole, and it is always interesting to me, and also refreshing and reinvigorating that just people like j-holes, man. It's like, hey, what's this show about? It's a horrible guy, and we're just gonna watch him be horrible, and maybe that's why people watch this show as well. But why do people love jackholes so much? And I think it's one of two things, because either you are a jackhole and it's like, yes, I agree with behavior like that, or you're not, and you're nice, and you're either intrigued or a little jealous that somebody can be that much of a jerk and live their life that way. But I like jackhole shows and jackhole movies, but sometimes I'm amazed that there are as many as there are, because maybe people really shouldn't like shows about jerks.
I've only watched the first 2 of that, and I'm intrigued and want to keep going. But is there a certain element of this guy's a jackhole, but also like trying to help people? Like, is there a little element of that to it, or have I not gotten far enough into it to make that judgment?
He is, but they still do, like they're doing like a little thing, like a lot of shows do, like a little beginning. And for some of them, it's like the little beginning is like a 2-minute vignette of just pure jackholeness for jackholeness sake. And it's like, who likes this? But I'm also like, oh, I've done that. I did that in a coffee shop one time too, but it's not related to the show at all. It's just a guy being a jerk. So
where do you stand on if you
jerk
hold
culture.
the door for somebody who gets to go in line first?
Yeah, no, I like maybe wouldn't yell at the person for not letting me go back in front of them, but probably would huff and puff, especially if they gave a huge order. Yeah, no, jerk culture. I'm very interested in jerk culture. That'd be a good name for a book too, or a podcast, jerk culture. But not that, like, do you think there's a lot of jerks in the world and a lot of jerk culture or not that much? I think there's more jerk culture than there are jerks because people who aren't jerks are fascinated by jerks.
I think that's right. And I also think there are people who are jerks who repress it because they don't want to get punched in the face.
Yeah.
I think jerk
but then
culture,
they embrace shows that then celebrate jerk culture because that's someone else saying the things they can't say out loud.
jerk culture, I think, manifests more in being inconsiderate, and not really considering the way that your actions impact people. I don't know if there's a lot of jerks that say the things that he says to people.
Yeah.
I think people are too afraid to express their opinions in public. And I absolutely have jerk culture moments in myself when I'm inconvenienced in public, as Bill can attest to.
Mm.
Well, we'll let Ari do the thinking last because I can't wait to hear what Ari's thinking. So, Landis, what are you thinking?
I can't remember what I actually had on my head before we started recording, but then I was because I was distracted by leaving the text messages and emails unread on your phone because we were having that conversation before the show started.
Yeah.
And like I can't do it. Like I think I have 5 unread emails like left unread that I've purposely left unread because they serve as reminders for me. But like I am going multiple times a day and just deleting the BS out of my inboxes. I cannot have anything sitting in there. But before we recorded, Doug, you were telling us how many unread emails you have, and it sounded like you were going to start saying a big number. So now I want to know what that number is.
27,979.
That's insane.
I don't.
How do you not get lost with what you need to see? That's the thing I don't know. Like,
there's actually very little in my emails that I need to see. It's mostly coupons for Potbelly.
I got so upset that I unplugged my headphones.
Yeah. So I'm more nervous to delete something that I think is trash that on the off chance I might need later. And then I just search, right? I just search like, oh, I need to find that email that said Ari. So I just search for Ari.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Have you always been that way? Or did you just reach the point of no return? And like, I can't possibly delete all these emails.
I've never been an email deleter.
Okay.
Because I'm worried that I'm going to delete something that I might actually need. So I've lived this way since email was invented while I was in college.
Like Potbelly.
I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. I think also too, and I don't know about like how you are at home, Doug, but I feel like if you have more emails in your inbox, you're more able to live in clutter or collect clutter or have clutter.
What you want to view my office right now?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Like, and I've seen your papers before and your notebooks and stuff, but
there's still our house is a little cluttered. I still remember the time it's like you came in our house and there was a $20 bill on the floor and we still talk about it. Yeah. And you were just like, oh man, you guys just have, and it's like, listen, we're not rich. We're just kind of messy. It's not.
But there's a system to it too. You know where everything is too. That's what people are like that. So I respect it. But I'm just afraid that I'm like, if I'm looking for an email or need something, that it will get lost in the clutter.
Yeah. No, just search. So
do you have a bunch of unread texts too? Is that
I don't delete texts.
But do you have is there a big red number on your text message icon?
111.
You have 111 unread text messages?
That's crazy.
Is that a lot?
I mean, here's the bottom of my phone.
Compared to the buying, it has none. Yeah. What's going on with the Uber Eats app there?
I got a notification on there.
I don't know. Some of it's like from my doctor. Oh, maybe I should have read that.
Notification.
Whoops.
Yeah.
I have one here that I didn't read about listen, man, there's like a 19 sports writer text thread from the Ohio State Sports Information, everybody on the beat. And I don't read those. Those pop in, and then everyone starts having conversations with each other and making jokes. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm going to throw my phone out the window here.
And in group text,
throw my phone out, set my phone on fire, then read those.
Yeah. In group text too, if you miss the first wave of conversation, I do not have the energy. I clear it. I've read it, but I haven't actually read it. Okay. I've got an epic rant. You want to hear mine?
Go.
Here's what I'm thinking. I cannot stand how sensationalized weather is in this country. Like every single time anything is going to happen, like whether it be like snow or lowering temperatures, like the news channels like make it seem like Armageddon is coming, and I don't understand it. I live in Dallas now. I have a daughter, and we had the first day of daycare today. And the daycare is closed today, and the roads are clear. It didn't rain. It didn't snow. It's just cold. That is not the reason to shut down a city or a school. And I don't understand why we can't, no matter what, the tidal wave that's coming is going to be the biggest tidal wave in history, or the temperatures are going to drop to a place that have never happened before. If you look at weather channels, I think that it's disingenuous. And I think it's actually dangerous because when actual real weather emergencies happen, your people are less likely to appreciate the danger that's coming, because every single time anything happens in weather, it's a stage 9 emergency. Like, I think we need to there needs to be more context and perspective the way that we talked about recruiting when it comes to reporting the weather.
You started this show by saying that you like to have strong opinions that are so be a weatherman. You just be like,
but
this tornado will kill everyone.
But you're talking to somebody too that doesn't look at the weather every single day. I'm not one of those people either. But I don't think there's a reason why Dallas, Texas should be on its heels on Tuesday, January 16th, because it was 20 degrees outside. There was no snow. There's no ice. There's nothing. Why is 20? Day school closed? Yeah, it's 20.
This is potentially a very stupid question that you may not have the answer to. Are buildings in Dallas built with the proper heating and insulation to handle a 20-degree day?
Power grid thing or something. I don't really know. I know that Texas power grid is different than everybody else for some reason, and heating and overusing the power is a problem. And we've had ice storms here in the past that were real problems, and it just got really cold, and everyone's like, it's going to be like it was last year, and it's like, it's not, and everything is fine, and you can walk outside and not slip, and we don't have to freak out every single time it gets cold. It's the winter, and if this was Ohio, what's happening out there, it would just be Tuesday.
Yeah, I think the real feel today was -10, and my kid went to daycare.
Yeah, it's closed. All the schools are closed here today, and the roads are dry and clean.
I just got one thing to say, brother. Come back to the north.
There you go.
I'd love to anytime. Yep.
Come back and be a king. He is the great Ari Wasserman. Again, Ari, where can we direct the people who I can't, I'm trying to envision the person who's like, oh yeah, I watched Doug and Bill today, and there was this Ari guy was on, and I liked him too. If maybe there's one person who's watching this and doesn't know where to find you, where can they find you?
Until Saturday on the podcast feed. It's a college football podcast nationally. We talk sometimes about the teams on the South, but the North is the best. And theathletic.com, where I write columns. So I appreciate that. And you guys are the stars of the show, but I appreciate you guys having me on, and it's always good to get back together with you.
Well, we'll have to make this a more frequent occurrence. And by the way, I'm going to go on Ari's show later this week. So that we'll
it's a home and home
conversation a little bit more. So for now, we appreciate you guys making us part of your week. If you were a regular KOTN watcher or listener, we could not be more grateful. Tell a friend, spread the word. If you're new, thanks for being here. As always, thanks to our great producer, Mike Urostowski, for making us look good and sound good. And it was great to be back together. The bad podcast was back, baby. For Ari Wasserman and Bill Landis, that's the A and the B. I'm the D.
You are.
That's true.
Something in the news. I'm Doug, and that was Kings of the North.